Chair, we're now live on YouTube. When you're ready, would you like to start the meeting?
Thanks very much, Wendy. So good afternoon and welcome to the East Devon District Council's Strategic Planning Committee on the 20th of July, 2021. I'm your chair, Councillor Dan Ledger. I'd like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live stream this morning. Strategic Planning Committee members are here in the Council chamber at Blackdown House with other participants taking part remotely. And as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout and be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the code of conduct applies throughout this meeting and reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this meeting is dependent on an internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are unable to reconnect, we'll consider this meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all mobile phones are turned off or are on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background level noises. Please do not interrupt during the meeting. Keep points short and try not to repeat short points that have already been made. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda today. Any member of the public who wants to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website at eastdevon.gov.uk. We'll now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. When your name is called, please unmute your microphone and confirm you are present by saying present at Blackdown House. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you. Chair, I'll begin with you. Councillor Ledger.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Davey. Councillor Davey.
Sorry, I think I muted myself and then unmuted. Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnott. Councillor Bailey.
Present at Blackdown House.
Councillor Blakey.
Present at Blackdown House.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Present virtually.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward. Councillor Howe.
Present at Blackdown House.
Councillor Ingham.
Present at Blackdown House.
Councillor Moulding.
Present at Blackdown House.
Councillor Pratt.
Present at Blackdown House. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Pratt, I could barely hear you there. Could you just repeat that?
Present at Blackdown House. Thank you.
Okay, I think your microphone might need sorting out because you're very, very faint. So if I just move on to Councillor Ryland.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Skinner.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. I can confirm we're quorate for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you very much, Wendy. We start with agenda item 1, which is public speaking, and I can confirm I am right in saying that there are no public speakers registered to speak. Is that correct, Wendy?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. If anyone has any comments on the minutes, can you do so by raising your electronic blue hands? If I see no hands raised, I'll consider those as agreed. So I see no hands and those minutes are agreed. Agenda item 3 are apologies. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bailey.
Councillor Bailey's on mute.
Sorry, I've unmuted myself. Sorry, yes, it's just a question. It's not a correction or anything, but I just wondered when we could expect the HELAR, the report on the HELAR panel, please. Because I know that we talked about it at the last meeting and it's minuted and it hasn't come forward for this meeting. So I'm just asking when we can expect that, please, which committee meeting, because presumably the HELAR panels will start meeting quite soon. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Sorry, I think Did everyone hear that on the stream?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
I could hear it through my mic, from my earphones.
Perfect. Okay. Mr. Freeman, would you like to just come back and answer with what the work schedule is for the rest of the year?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, this wasn't obviously on the work schedule, but I have noted it as a request from the previous meeting, and we are working on a report for presentation to your meeting on the 7th of September. Councillor Bailey is correct. The meetings of the panel will need to take place shortly after that, but there is still time to for members to consider the details discussed at the previous meeting at the 7th of September, with the intention that the panel meetings commence either towards the end of that month or in October. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to agenda item 3, which are apologies. Wendy, have we received any apologies?
Just one apology from Councillor Pook. I'm expecting Councillor Arnott and Councillor Hayward to arrive later. I'm not sure about Councillor Allen, but if he doesn't turn up, I'll note his apologies too.
He's here when.
Yeah, so
Councillor Allen.
We've just had Councillor Allen and Councillor Hayward just arrive, but they're just coming onto their devices at the moment. So as soon as they join the meeting, we'll get declarations off them. So
Lovely,
item 4 is declarations of interest, and again over to you, Wendy, for a roll call. Can I just remind members, if you do have any interest, that you list the item number that it relates to, what type of interest it is, whether it's a personal or a DPI, and why they're declaring it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Chair, if I could start with you.
None from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
I think relevant to item 8 and 9 is the fact that I'm an Exmouth Town Councillor.
Thank you, and that's a personal one. Thank you. Councillor Allen. Is he still trying to join us?
He's currently not in the meeting yet.
Okay, I'll come back to Councillor Allen. Councillor Bailey.
Mike.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to declare a personal interest in relation to 8 and 9, items 8 and 9, that I'm a Western Parish Councillor, and that also I'm a Devon County Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Yes, regarding item 7, that's a personal interest. I'm a member of Cranbrook Town Council and also a member of the Cranbrook Strategic Delivery Board.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. Items 7, 8 and 9, I'm a Broadcliffe Parish Councillor. Obviously, that's the ward next to Cranbrook.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Sorry, Wendy, just a personal interest, Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. A personal declaration in terms of item 7. Both my daughters live in Cranbrook and may benefit from the LIF. I suppose it's a pecuniary interest in terms of item 8, as my wife works for the Royal Devon Exeter NHS Foundation Trust. So at that point, I'll seek to advise whether I should leave the room, and it's pecuniary in terms of in that it's my wife, but I'll seek advice as to whether I should leave the room for that item. And item 9, I suppose it's simply because of my role as a clerk to the parish councils of All Saints, Chardstock and Newton Poppleford and Hertford. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Howe.
Personal interest as in I'm a parish councillor and the ward member for Cliff St Mary and all the other wards I'm a member of. I also, well, I suppose it's personal, but at the same time could be pecuniary. I own a business in Cliff St Mary that in theory, if development happens anywhere around the area, in theory, it's a customer could come and use us. but on speaking to Mr. Gordon Lennox, he was quite happy that it's a theoretical, and as such, I've never used it as a pecuniary, apart from where it's immediately adjacent to or very close to our business, but I make the declaration nevertheless.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Ingham.
Nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moulding.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Wendy. Personal interest in item 789 on the basis of being a Broadclyst Parish Councillor, and in fact, a development within my ward is name checked in item 8. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Skinner.
I declare an interest. I take it at 6 is the first beginning when we talk about employment land regarding would be potentially FWS Carter and Sons. I'll make that interest clear. And on 9 on the role and function of settlements, I have some land of my own that is in the HELA process. So I make that declaration clear as well regarding in the village of Tallerton where I live.
Thank you very much.
Sorry to confirm, Councillor Skinner, they're both personal interests.
Yes, I think so. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, do you want me just to pick up the points raised about the potential pecuniary interest, Councillor Hayward and
yes.
Councillor Howe? Councillor Hayward, I think if you consider that it is pecuniary, then once you've declared it as pecuniary, then I think you probably have to leave the room at that stage. The decision is, of course, yours whether it is pecuniary or not. Once you've declared it, I think that's a done deal. Councillor Howe, same thing. I think if Henry's advised you previously that it's not pecuniary, then you can rely on that. If you consider it is, then once you've disclosed it, you should leave. But again, the decision, unfortunately, is yours.
Chair, back to you.
To do with the...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, could I just ask the question regarding pecuniary interest? Could you just lay that out for me? I know it's something we should probably know, but I just want to be absolutely clear on these things, if you could. I mean, the interest of where Councillor Howe, and the reason why that I'm drilling into this is because what Councillor Howe saw, if somebody goes into a shop, are you talking about that he would have a personal financial gain? Is that what that is?
It's, as you know, Councillor Skinner, it's complicated, and you have to look at the facts of each, the interest itself and the matter to which it applies. So somebody who has an interest that is triggered as a DPI for some matters will not always, the interest doesn't all, the type of interest doesn't always stay the same, although the subject matter may, because it will depend on the matter being discussed. So it is, as you know, it's a long evolving story. I think the issue is if you feel it's pecuniary, the safest thing to do is to declare it as such and leave the room, because of course a DPI is a criminal offence as opposed to just a monitoring officer offence. I'm sorry, it's a bit vague. If you've got a specific, I'd suggest discuss the details of it. I'm sure you don't want to do that now, but discuss the details of it separately so that Henry or I can give you some advice.
Yeah, okay, fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. So moving on to agenda item 5, which are matters of urgency. Now, I don't have any matters of urgency, but Councillor Skinner has said that he wishes to raise an item.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me this opportunity. I'm only going to be very brief, and that is some of you may be aware, certainly within my patch, is that we have a plethora of solar panels coming, certainly in my area and in Councillor Rylance's area as well. And these are not small and they're going to be rather large. And we think there may be more than one. We don't exactly know, and I don't want to get into that space right now. It's not here to discuss it now, Chair, as I said to you. But the reason why I'm bringing it as a matter of urgency to this committee, being the policy making committee, is I would like to ensure that it is certainly raised for our next meeting if we could. I'm quite happy to open into discussion with that, and I'm sure Councillor Rollins would like to join in that debate. This is certainly very much within our wards, just to see where we sit with policy and how we go forward, as I do think that the applications, and one is right on our boundary with my boundary with Mid Devon, and that one has just been refused only last week, which is quite a large one. We've got one coming right beside that, and if you start ramping all these things together, which are going to go to the Broadcliff substation, I think what we would really like to know is what is the scale and the vastness of scale of where this is before we start this piecemeal approach, and what our policies are and how we feel as a council, which I think that particular subject is a little bit greater than just 15 members sat around a planning committee saying yes or no on the advice of what officers would be. I think it's a much bigger debate for the council itself, and certainly for strategic planning in the way that we're going with the environment and our global climate change bill, which we seem to be supporting as a council, and what the balance is between that and development. And I'd like just to raise that now through you, Chair, as I think it's such a big issue and it is coming forward. And I'll leave it to that, and hopefully we can discuss in getting it to the next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much for raising that. So just while Councillor Allen's just joined us, so Councillor Allen, do you have any declarations you wish to declare at this time?
Yes, I apologise for not being having the meeting codes to get in. I have no declarations.
Thank you, Councillor Allen.
Thank you very much. So moving on to agenda item 6, which is confidential and exempt items. So I can confirm there are no items to be discussed under this agenda item heading. Agenda item 7 is Cranbrook Local Infrastructure Fund, and it's over to Andy Wood to present his report. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I'm going to introduce this in terms of a bit of background, and then hand over to Thea Billiter, who's going to talk about the context in relation to the Cranbrook Development Plan document and viability issues currently. So the context in terms of by way of background is this. High upfront costs, infrastructure costs, can be both a brake, but potentially a barrier to delivery of large-scale developments. We've seen successfully in the context of Cranbrook the use of revolving infrastructure funds to overcome that barrier. They invest upfront to accelerate the delivery of critical infrastructure, to deliver it upfront, and then to recoup those costs on a roof tax basis as and when homes are brought forward and sold. It thereby very much reduces risk and improves cash flow for developers, and is a means of really nailing down the timing of critical infrastructure, particularly where that infrastructure, the benefit of it, accrues across multiple developer parties. So the example that is given in the background papers in relation to what was used to unlock the initial development of Cranbrook over 10 years ago now, was investment from the Regional Infrastructure Fund, £12 million of revolving investment. Just to give you the example of St Martin's Primary School, a critical piece of infrastructure in phase 1 of Cranbrook. It was brought forward and opened by the time there were around 30 homes built and occupied in Cranbrook. And that was well in excess, or well in advance of the trigger of 500 occupations in Cranbrook. The advantage of that was it really instilled confidence within the local housing market in relation to the availability of school places, and really cemented Cranbrook's attractiveness, if you like, to young families as well. So it was a really considerable advantage. All those funds, and indeed further funds that were made available later on to deliver the Cranbrook Education Campus, have all gone out and been repaid over time. So a very successful mechanism that has had a tangible and beneficial impact for Cranbrook in the past. So I'll just hand over to to Thea to explain the current context in relation to the Cranbrook DPD.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, the Cranbrook Plan DPD is still going through its examination in public, and there's a current round of consultation underway in relation to some updated viability information which we've submitted to the Planning Inspectorate. However, it is fair to say that despite open and frequent discussions with those viability participants, we still don't have full agreement with some of them regarding the development viability. Going forward, there is no longer a consortia of developers, and so we're left in a situation whereby we have potentially upwards of 6 different developers who we need to negotiate with and secure agreement over the delivery of infrastructure items, which in the context of having some large, big ticket items of infrastructure such as new schools means that cash flow becomes of increasing importance to those developers. So as stated in the report, we modelled a £30 million fund as part of this recent viability work, and it showed that around £9 million of cost savings could be made, which those interested participants in the viability hearings have welcomed the principle of. So the infrastructure required for Cranbrook is significant going forward, and an infrastructure fund could be expected to be used to help forward fund items such as the first additional primary school that's required, the health, wellbeing and leisure provision, and potentially highway upgrade works on London Road as a minimum. Depending upon how the fund revolves, other items could include a new community building, the additional education provision, which comprises a second primary school, so a 4th primary school, if you like, and some funding towards special educational needs school, and delivery of enhanced public transport provision. Back over to you, Chair, unless there's any questions.
Thanks very much, Thea. Really appreciate that. So members can see the 3 recommendations there. Does anyone from outside of Cabinet committee wish to speak? No, so we'll move it into the committee, and Councillor Jess Bailey, you're up first.
Thank you. I have to say I was quite surprised by the money, the quantum that potentially the district council is going to borrow. And sometimes a report comes through which you're not really expecting, and there's not actually that much detail. And I know that people may say, well, this is only in principle, but I'm very concerned about how much money. I'm very concerned that it says it's described as high risk. Later on in the document, it says that there are no costs, or there should be cost neutral, but that is totally dependent on being able to recover the money, presumably through the mechanisms. But it seems to me that this is really risky, and I feel that there's really not enough detail in this report, and I would expect, considering the size of money, which I would describe as eye-watering, we should at the very least expect some real detail in the report on what it's going to be used for, because we were told that there's been modelling and that modelled at 30 million. Where is it? What's it for? You know, I don't think it's enough to just talk about a school and a road and, you know, where is it? Why is it not in this report? So that's my first comment. My second comment is I'm not clear at all what's happened with Cranbrook Town Centre and where we are with that. So I don't know why that is. The third comment I wanted to make was that, well, it was 30 million, but now it's 40 million, and that's to do with electricity. Well, how? What electricity? What's that cost for? And I think generally I just need more detail, more comfort, more reassurance, more analysis of, you know, it's fine comparing with what we did before, but we weren't bearing the risk before. This time we're bearing the risk. And I'd really like to know what other councils are doing. How are other councils meeting the upfront infrastructure costs? And I understand that developers may not want to take the risks associated with those very large costs, but then do the taxpayers of East Devon want to? So, you know, I just feel we need much more explanation, much more detail, a report from Simon Davey, even at this stage, you know, to satisfy the concerns I have about what it's actually all for, and is it actually the right thing to be doing? Because I think of all the reports that I've come across, this is the biggest expenditure. And when we talked about the commercial infrastructure fund, that was 20 million. And this is 40 million. And I know that they're for different things, but that's quite a lot. And this is an enormous amount. I think that was all I wanted to say really at this point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Allen, you can go next.
I was following what Councillor Bailey was saying, and my concern was that given the way that the reserves are being depleted to a level which is vulnerable, and given that there are no cost elements at all in this plan, I'm proposing, along with what Councillor Bailey was saying, that we have a proper cost risk analysis put into the paper before we approve it for going forward in principle. Thank you.
So, Councillor Allen, you've just made one proposal there. Is that the other recommendations that are listed in the report, you don't wish to take any of those forward, you just wish to put that forward as the substantive proposal?
There are no formal recommendations highlighted in this report. I only want to put forward that one recommendation at this stage because it's impossible to make any decisions when you don't know the financial implications. Even in principle, while we might agree that it's important that this infrastructure is put in place, it's equally important that the council takes decisions with a clear understanding of the financial implications. You haven't even quoted what the cost of the borrowing would be. It's an inadequate report, and I am proposing what I did.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Could I get a seconder for that? Councillor Ingham's seconding. Okay, so
Chair, can I just ask that Councillor Allen just repeats his proposal so that we're clear on the wording of it, please?
Yep, no problem at all. Councillor Allen?
That this report cannot proceed until it has proper financial cost analysis, particularly of the loan cost implications for the council.
Thank you very much. So, Thea or Andy, we've had a couple of, well, there's quite a few questions there. Can I just let you cover those off, and then we'll just do two councillors at a time and keep coming back to you if that's okay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think in essence it's a pretty simple mechanism. If I were to put it in its very simplest terms, so we would borrow money at the PWLB, Public Works Loan Board rate, which I'm going to say is 2%. Obviously, that's variable. But the issue with the Cranbrook viability work is that private sector, the assumption there is borrowing at 6%. The cost of capital is much higher, and therefore, over the basis of the long-term investment, the overall net uplift in viability or viability improvement that has been modelled through the use of revolving funds, which capitalise on the difference in terms of the lower rate that the public sector can borrow at, is around £8 million in terms of that improvement for the overall balance sheet, if you like, for Cranbrook infrastructure. In terms of how other councils approach this issue, I mean, one obvious way would be just to trade off more infrastructure and not to deliver that. And that's the basis upon which some of the viability arguments have gone forward through the Cranbrook DPD. For me, that's very high risk in itself, in the sense that you would end up with a new town that would be bereft of some of the critical infrastructure it necessarily needs and demands going forward. And hence, I absolutely understand the points that are being made around risk. But I would say that £32 million of revolving infrastructure funds have gone into Cranbrook at those prices, so probably closer towards 50 million in today's prices, and has been secured through bespoke legal agreements, through bonds, through parent company guarantees to secure the repayment of those funds, and that has all happened, as I say, over the past decade. We have used this mechanism ourselves in relation to current on-site infrastructure improvements through the Enterprise Zone programme, the long lane investment, the upgrade of the lane next to the airport is also using, if you like, forward funding of infrastructure and payments that will be secured from development in the future with bespoke legal agreements. So it's a trodden path. There is risk, undoubtedly, but those risks are mitigated through the use of bespoke legal agreements to secure the payments, come what may, in terms of bond payments and other things. So that's, I think, the key point. I do understand the points that are being made around risk, but as you can see from Simon's comments at the end, that is around being cost neutral. So we are recovering both the capital outlay and the interest payments, and that would be the basis upon which those funding agreements would be negotiated with the developer parties. Chair.
Very much, Andy. I think it is a case of what do we want? We've had it in Axminster where we said we want forward delivery of a relief road. Here we've got a chance to actually have timely delivery of infrastructure. It's a way of actually moving this forward, which, yes, it's got some risks attached to it, but those can be mitigated, and it's the easiest way to actually give Cranbrook the infrastructure it's needed and deserves. That's my personal opinion, though. It's Councillor Pratt. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. We can't make a recommendation on the word of the things that have been said today, because we're talking about £40 million. We need to know exactly how that figure is arrived at. We need to know the terms and conditions attached to the loan agreement, and we need a comment on risk. So all that's got to be put in writing, in my view, and we should have a full report. Then we can decide whether to make a recommendation on it. That's all I need to say, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Ingham, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with what Councillor Pratt has said. I don't have a problem with this in principle at all. It's nice to see that the new leadership are embracing capitalism and see that it can work for you and make a profit for this council. But we have to make sure that we have the appropriate evidence to say and justify our decisions. And I think this actual report needs to be filled out a bit more. We need more meat on the bones so that we can say, hand on heart, we know this is going to succeed and why. And for example, what insurance are we going to take to mitigate the risk? Okay, I need to hear that. Also, if we're going to borrow this £40 million, which we'll get back from developers, just how many dwellings are going to be required to be built out to recoup the £40 million? I'd like to see and hear what officers currently see as the appropriate figure. Because in order to do that, if we're going to be building hundreds, thousands of houses to recoup that £40 million at Cranbrook, there is a risk that we can't do so elsewhere in the district, because otherwise we'll be tarmacking the whole district, which is not what our intention is. So I'd like to hear what we get, what we have to sacrifice in either hectares or houses for that 40 million, please.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Rollins, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to preface this by saying that I know that Cranbrook deserves good facilities and good infrastructure, and they're long overdue in some places. And I'm convinced that Councillor Blakey would agree with me on this. I know how successful the public loans have been to secure infrastructure already existing in Cranbrook and around the west end of East Devon, as it's known. I know that the word high risk alarms people, and I feel that one of my first questions about this is this decision time critical? Do we have to make a decision now, or can we go on an exercise of gathering more information? That's my first question. My second question is, are you confident that we can actually secure repayment of the full loan on a per roof basis? And is it going to be on a per roof basis, or is it going to be time limited? Because one option would see the developers building very, very slowly, I suspect, and the other one would see the building much pacier pace. I just, unlike other people, I wouldn't want to take a cheese paring approach to this. I'd like to know that any money that we do borrow is going to be used to benefit the people of Cranbrook and surrounding areas, which the current facilities do, but clearly for Cranbrook as it is now, and Cranbrook going forwards as it will be bigger, they need bigger scaled up facilities. That we can't get past that. We have to be aware that we're trying to deliver a viable community here. We can't deliver a viable community by building the houses and then 30 years later delivering the school. That's not how we're going to make the place viable. So we have to be very careful in weighing up the risks, that we're weighing up financial risks versus the risks of making Cranbrook unviable for further development. So I just want to put that out there. We need to make sure that we're making the right decision for the people of Cranbrook as well, not just for our repayment schedule. So are we going to be able to get secure repayment on this in a timely enough fashion for Simon Davey? I suppose is my major big question. And is it roof dependent or is it time dependent? Thank you. We probably do need a bit more information.
Thank you very much. Andy or Thea, can you just cover again the risk securities that we're proposing, be that the parent company bond or whatever we've got?
Yeah, I'd probably take that, Chair. So there are 3 established ways of underwriting, if you like, repayment in the event, for example, that a developer were to go bust. And those 3 ways are a bond, a financial bond, a parent company guarantee, or a charge over land. So even if the company were to go into administration, there is an alternative and fallback means of securing payment or repayment of the funds. And those are the 3 mechanisms that are utilised. 2 of those are currently in play in relation to the Long Lane scheme, for example. So there are bespoke agreements that secure those repayments at the moment. Chair, if I can just pick up on the timing issues as well, and Thea will no doubt want to come in here as well. I think there is the reason it's coming to you in principle because there is a critical timing issue, and that relates to the protracted discussions around viability at the Cranbrook DPD examination. There is a need to provide some comfort, some assurance to the inspector that if this mechanism is being looked at in principle, and that will provide a benefit in terms of overall viability. If we are unable to do that, then she will be looking to cancel off a further 8 million in infrastructure potentially. And bear in mind that's a primary school plus. Those are significant amounts of infrastructure that wouldn't be able to be afforded in relation to Cranbrook going forward. That's the reason it's coming to you in principle. Is obviously a recommendation you receive a further report around terms of reference that would need any group, decision-making group, would need to consider detailed investment proposals, including picking up on the points, for example, from Councillor Rollins. This would be on a roof tax basis. Development and the housing market moves in cycles, so it goes at quicker and slower rates, and we'd need to model that financially. I think the critical point is that the cost of capital, i.e. the interest cost, would still need to be repaid in full by the developer party, so that risk would be mitigated as long as, with the additional security in place as well, such that all funds came back to the council and the overall cost was neutral to the council, if that makes sense, Chair.
Makes exact sense to me. Thea, do you have anything you wish to add?
Yeah, if I just pick up on the element about giving comfort to the inspector. So as I said earlier, the inspector's currently out to consultation to the viability participants regarding the additional information that we have provided in relation to viability. As part of that information, there is all the modelling to do with this, that was what was at the time a £30 million revolving infrastructure fund, which talked about £8.9 million worth of savings. We need to give the inspector some comfort that we are actively pursuing a route such as this in the interest of preserving as much of the infrastructure as is possible within the town. If we lose that, as Andy said, that's a primary school, or it's all of the contribution towards the health and wellbeing hub, or perhaps more likely is it's another 120 affordable homes that wouldn't be delivered. So this is high stakes at the moment. And I would perhaps say that we're not asking for a full sign off on this principle. It really is just the principle for us to go away and look at it in more detail and then come back as per, I think it's recommended point 4 or 3 of the report with full terms of reference in relation to the scheme.
Thanks very much for that, Thea. Councillor Arnott, you're up next. Councillor Arnott, could you give your declarations first as well? Thank you.
I have to ask, can you hear me, Chair? Good, okay, slightly odd headphones at them. No declarations of interest and apologies for late arrival. So I listened to the debate so far. This is a matter that goes back 10 years, perhaps 15 years, to the flawed model that was chosen on the basis of free market, as Councillor Ingham has referenced, that a development corporation would be allowed to build a new town. And from the perspective of my friends from Cranbrook, the 3 district councillors there, none of whom I think can be accused of being relevant organised. It's been a terrible failure for the people of Cranbrook. It hasn't been able to develop what has been promised. We have a moral and ethical duty to the people of Cranbrook to sort this out. I think the second thing I'd say, and I would address this to Councillor Bailey and Councillor Allen, is you have just heard very clear officer advice. And I know you are both extremely keen on adhering to officer advice and respecting it. And I think it's been given in good faith. The third thing I'd say is that I do wonder whether what the report says has actually been understood. So recommendation 3 is to consider a further report setting out the detailed terms of reference for the fund at a future cabinet meeting. And then if you look at the end of the report under the financial implications, this is an in principle recommendation to cabinet to enable further work to progress, to bring back details to cabinet and council for final decision. The principle that needs to be evidenced is that there will be no cost implications for the council. Now, this committee, the Strategic Planning Committee, is not an audit and governance committee. It is a committee that is, in my mind, meant to be proactive and creative in trying to provide infrastructure, both housing and economic, for the people of East Devon. And I think that is what these recommendations do. Now, of course, you're slightly naive and not fully across the horrific details of the dilemmas that Cranbrook faces, and you just read the headlines, high risk, 40 million. Of course, they're going to say, I don't know, we better not do that. And we better had not do that unless it can be ultimately proven to Cabinet and Council that this is a viable and legitimate thing to do. So on that basis, Chair, and I know there's already a proposal from Councillor Allen, but I would wish to propose that the 3 recommendations be adopted by this committee. Thank you.
So that's Councillor Arnott proposing all the recommendations as is listed in the report. Councillor Arnott, can you just put yourself on mute, please?
With pleasure.
Could I get a seconder for that, please? Councillor Rollins is seconding that. Anita, do you want to come in quickly and just describe the role of this committee versus what it would be for against it, the onward to both Cabinet and Council, please?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a wish to address the concern about what exactly you would be agreeing to at this point. You're agreeing to the wording that's in the recommendation, that it would be an in principle decision. The further decision for that would be made by Cabinet, and then because it is new money and new spend, it would be a decision of full council. So you're not you don't have the power to be the final sign off at this point. It has to go through the rest of the procedure. Does that, does that cover off, Chair, what you were looking for?
Yeah, that covers off everything. Thank you, Anita. So Councillor Hayward, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Leah and Andy for the report. Thank you to Anita for that clarification. I think everyone in this room shares the aggravation and frustration that when times are good, developers make a lot of money. They're in business. Why should they not? When times are hard, or when there's some difficult decisions, suddenly they turn their eye to the public sector, and we have to pick up the tab. I'm a firm believer in using public money to advance projects for social good. But conversely, I'm an RFO myself, and risk is very important. I too would like to see some more financial data, some more modelling. Everyone in this room can receive it, can understand it. It can be delivered to us in Part B if it's commercially sensitive. Additionally, from our legal team, I'd like to see some what ifs. So we arrange these three measures to facilitate the repayment. I'd like to see some what if scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? Do some advanced risk modelling. But as has been said, this is in principle. That's not a decision for this committee. That will be for Cabinet and ultimately Council. So there's two more safety checks to go through to make sure that everyone is happy with how this is going to proceed. I think the fact is the development will not proceed. We've seen quite a few times in this district, developers hold us to ransom by saying, we're not going to do this because of X and Y. They know that if council fails to deliver housing, our 5-year land supply shrinks. They know that. They're very good at knowing it. And it's probably part of their general armoury of how they negotiate. So in order to deliver these things, I do take the point that was raised regarding 3.4 about delivering the requiring electricity infrastructure. Obviously, I've had wind of what's happening, but it's evident that some members of the committee have not. So I think it's only fair that a full report on that particular issue comes before this committee, because it will have profound implications for the for the West End. But this is an in-principle decision from us on a strategic planning basis to allow others to take it forward, and many members on this panel to then reconsider it, and ultimately everyone on this committee to consider it when it becomes before council. So I'm with some reservations and some wish to learn a bit more, but in principle, I think this is sound. It's what councils are there for. We are the point of last resort. No one else is going to do it for the people of Cranbrook, so we must. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayward. Councillor Ingham, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to get verification on part of my question, which wasn't answered, is that by my estimate, this means that during the building out process, to recoup this money, every developer will have to pay back, they'll pay us £10,000 plus per dwelling. That must appear in your model so far. Could you please verify that amount of money? Is that what your expectation is? If it isn't, please tell me what it is.
Andy, you're going to have to show your workings out here. show us your sums.
Yeah, in principle, so it's a straight numerator denominator. So you have the cost of a particular piece of infrastructure, and then you have the number of homes that benefit from that, and you divide one by the other fundamentally, and that obviously varies just to pick up on the point around electrical supply, we are looking at a wholesale upgrade of electrical capacity that will potentially benefit, which would be expensive, but would potentially benefit all 4,000 homes in the expansion areas. So yes, I mean, £10,000 ballpark is probably about right, I would suggest, in terms of what will need to come back from each house. But that is as and when the houses are built and sold, and obviously in cash flow terms is advantageous for the developer when that comes off or out of, if you like, the sale price going forward, rather than having to be met up front. And that is in essence the mechanism. It will vary according to the piece of infrastructure under consideration. Obviously the primary schools, for example, may only serve part of the expansion areas of Cranbrook, not all of it. For example, I'm not sure whether Thea wants to come in further detail, Chair.
Thank you very much.
I didn't have anything else to add.
Perfect. Thank you. So, Councillor Bailey, over to you again.
Thank you very much. So I agree with most of what Councillor Hayward says, apart from the bit where about that there are 2 more safety checks, so we can go ahead, because I think that's I'd be very wary of that, because it's like the train's left the station and on the tracks, and I don't think it's ready to leave the station. The Cranbrook Centre, I'm still not clear what's going on with Cranbrook Centre. Councillor Arnott talked about a moral and ethical duty to sort out Cranbrook, but my understanding was that this money is for building out further an extension of Cranbrook rather than sorting out. So I'm not quite sure about that. I really don't understand why we weren't given the modelling. If the modelling exists, why is it not part of this report? And I think there is an issue potentially with charges over people's homes, and from a council's point of view, and implications of securing that and how we get our money back. And we're in a different position to either a fund or a developer, so I'm a bit wary about that. And the final thing I'd say is that Andy Wood talked about this, a well-trodden path, but I would say Long Lane's completely different, because it's a far smaller amount of money from my recollection, and it's in the enterprise zone, and it's enterprise zone related, and the previous amount of money that was advanced in this way wasn't secured by East Devon District Council. So this is radically different in my book, but there we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Howe, you're up.
Thank you very much, Chair. Where do I start? I think we need to remember what this committee is for. And that is not to analyse the finances. It is literally to make right policies for going forward. And on that, it's quite simple. Cranbrook needs this. This is fundamental to Cranbrook expansion. And without that Cranbrook expansion, our 5-year housing land supply fails. Pure and simple, guys. Let's just be simple about this. Now, what has been said, and has been quite clear, and is clear in the report as well, is the financial side of it. And Councillor Bailey does make a point. I'm not arguing with her point at all, but that is where each committee has its role to play in a council. We are not the financial experts. That is left to others. And particularly in this case, this refers to Cabinet and full council to go over the finances. We are just setting in principle, do we want to deliver this infrastructure for Cranbrook or not? It is that simple, guys. It is that simple. And we need to get it right. So as such, and being as this is done frequently, I think we have to do it. We don't have a choice. Otherwise, Cranbrook will once again stall, virtually stall. Particularly with the inquiry on the expansion zones going on around Cranbrook. The other point I need to make, do I need to make it or not? I suppose I will. And I suppose it's a plea to full council and to Cabinet when they look at this. Of the 3 options set out by Mr. Wood, Andy, when he was saying this, of how we secure our money, please look at the land option and the bond option. Do not look at the parent company options, because at present, no, this uncertainty going forward is high, shall we say, so we need to secure it on assets, not on physical possibility ratings of companies, particularly on the smaller developers that we know will be involved as well with part of these expansion zones. And coming back to Councillor Bailey's about that very fact of securing it on the land, obviously the legal agreement, I hope, again, we're not analysing it, but we, when it comes to that, will be that we will be first to be paid when that property is sold. The lawyers will pick that out, absolutely, and you won't be allowed to buy a house if you've got that sort of ground over it. So it doesn't affect the homeowners, it only affects the developers, and we have got to make this saving and push this development through and get the best for Cranbrook, which is something we've struggled with for years. This is an opt-out. We've got to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe. I'm only going to take two more speakers, so we'll take Councillor Blakey and Councillor Skinner, as neither of you have spoken on this item, and then we'll take it to a vote. So, Councillor Blakey, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Don't actually have a great deal to add to what's already been said, but just to pick out a few salient points. First is, imagine, if you will, that you're going to build a new development consisting of 4,000 dwellings with the parents and the children and the grandparents and everybody else. And you're going to do that with no schools, with no roads, with poor highways, and with, finally, no usable electricity supply. What chance have you got? None whatever. So what we're looking at here is a proposal to enable those things to happen so that a successful development can follow. All the arguments about how Cranbrook's been done in the past really don't matter now, because what's done is done. But in order to enable this district to provide the level of housing that is required for the future, for those properties to be built, for developers to be interested, and for people to be prepared to move in where there are facilities, where there is infrastructure, I honestly feel, as Councillor Howe said, that we don't have a choice in this. This is a fairly straightforward thing to do. The risk is identified as high risk in the report, but in reality, I think that the management of that risk is on the lower end of the scale, and that this authority will in due course see its money come back. And it's not about funding private enterprise as such. It is about providing appropriate facilities for new development for the people who already live in East Devon and those who will be moving in. The fact is that Cranbrook already has some fairly low levels of social infrastructure, and that'll be the subject of another debate on another day. The big thing is the supply of electricity infrastructure, because without that, absolutely nothing's going to happen. We know that the demand for electricity is increasing. There are to be no individual fossil fuel based heating systems in Cranbrook, as there are not now. So a good electricity supply is essential. And if we're looking to achieve our own green targets going forward, things like electric vehicle charging points and so on are going to have to become the norm. So there's going to have to be a significant investment in the electricity supply for the expansion zones. And finally, I'd like to, as has already been pointed out by Councillors Howe, Rylance and Arnott, come back to the recommendation itself. We're not asked to make a decision here on whether we borrow the money or not. That's for elsewhere. What we're asked to do is to note the significance of the fund, to recommend to Cabinet that there is an in-principle agreement to borrow that money, and to consider whether a further report detailing terms of reference for the fund should be sent to Cabinet as well. These are fairly simple decisions. They're the start of the process, but as Andy Wood has pointed out, we need to get on with it. So the recommendation's already been made. It's been proposed and seconded, and I will be throwing my hat in behind those who have done so. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Blakey. Councillor Skinner, over to you, and then we'll go into the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I've been at the last of the queue. I mean, most things have got said, and some things, like Councillor Blakey, I'm going to touch on just one or two things. I do absolutely, if we wind back to when Councillor Bailey spoke first, and understanding the principles of what we're getting into here, very good question to ask, and quite right to ask that question. It's only right and proper. Going on to Councillor House saying we're not the Finance Committee, and I believe Councillor Arnott sort of touched on the same thing. Absolutely right. We're not the Finance Committee. And I'm glad Councillor House spoke in front of me regarding the Strategic Planning Committee and what our role is here. And our role here is not to wind in and out the finance of what we are. And we've got principles. And if you look at the principles of where we are, it's still all coming back anyway. Through you, Chair, it's still all coming back anyway. But it's about the principles, how we move on. The real crux of where we are with this is that Cranbrook is in dire need of having infrastructure funding. It needs funding to put into it for it to move forward and move on. And I very much take on board what Councillor Blakey says. Councillor Blakey lives in Cranbrook. It's very important to him. That's why he stood as a councillor, to get things done in the town as to where he lives. And that's really important. And it's important for us to all hear. It's a major planning scheme that we've had in East Devon for many a year. And it was certainly started on my watch when I came here. And there's been many paths of good, bad and indifferent has come along, and there's been a learning curve. And not just because of whether or not developers are this way or that way, as might get said. I see developers as partners, and it's how we work as going forward in agreement with one another. But for me, I think there's no doubt, and I'm going to absolutely agree with Councillor Blakey. There's no doubt that I'm going to be supporting the recommendations put forward, Chair, through you. And I think most things have been said, and I'll leave it to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So we had the original proposal from Councillor Allen and seconded by Councillor Ingham. Councillor Ingham.
Yes, can I summarise?
So, Councillor Ingham, are you saying
I
no?
withdraw my support for that recommendation. Sorry, Mark.
Okay, so in light of that, is anyone to second Councillor Allen's proposal?
I will.
Councillor Bailey. Okay, so that's proposed by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Bailey. Anita, can you just sum up what the proposal was, and we'll take that to a vote, please?
Chair, I have the responsibility under the Constitution to make a closing statement about the proposal.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. The real issue here is that the proposal put forward has actually been put forward on a financial basis, not on the basis of a particular detail about what is supposed to be delivered in infrastructure. There is no detail here in terms of planning of what infrastructure is actually being requested for this 40 million. Now, whereas I totally agree with Mike Howe about the responsibilities of this committee, then there is absolutely essential that when proposals are put forward, they are clearly stating what the planning issues are. And the planning issues are not just we need infrastructure. The planning issues are what infrastructure is needed. And is the 40 million really going to meet that infrastructure need? Or do we need 30 or 60? Or what do we need for it? It's not an issue for me that you're suggesting that we take a risk that will require us to pay £800,000 a month in interest charges per year in interest charges. That's an issue for cabinet, audit and governments and scrutiny and everybody else. What is at issue here is we don't know what infrastructure is being requested and at what basis it's being requested. That is fundamentally the responsibility of this committee, and that is the reason why I'm asking for a report to be properly returned and presented to this committee, which details what is being requested. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Allen. Just for Councillor Allen's benefit, Thea, isn't all of the items the items that would be subject to the revolving infrastructure fund listed under the IDP?
Yes, so there is an updated infrastructure delivery plan for Cranbrook. There's been various iterations of it, but the most recent one and all the earlier iterations are all on the Cranbrook plan pages, as indeed now is the viability modelling that was undertaken most recently, but it wasn't available when it only went on the website this week.
So the reality is that the detailed information has not been presented to this committee. That is the responsibility of this committee. If you vote to proceed without that detail, then this committee is not fulfilling its function.
Thanks very much, Councillor Allen. So, Anita, can we go to the vote, please?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. So the wording I have from Councillor Allen, the recommendation would be the report cannot proceed until it has proper cost analysis, including the cost implications to the council. So members, if you're ready to go to the vote, please vote yes using your yes and no buttons. Vote yes if you're in favour of the motion and no if you're against. If you'd like to abstain, please raise your electronic hand.
I'm sorry, I don't have, sorry, yes I do.
For the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. So we have 1 abstention, we have 7 votes against the motion and 2 in support. So that motion has fallen.
Thanks very much, Wendy and Anita. So we move to the second proposal. And Anita, can you again take us? That is just as written in the report, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
So members, you can see the 3 recommendations listed in the report. Can you vote yes with your green ticks or no with the red cross, please?
Thank you. And a hand if you want to abstain.
Thank you. So we have 9 votes in support, 3 against and no abstentions. So that is carried.
Thank you very much. So we move on then to agenda item 8, which is planning obligations securing financial contributions to the healthcare, sorry. And can I welcome Dave Tarbert, who is the RD&E Business Development Director. He'll be available to answer any specific specialist questions. Could I just ask members, in the first instance, could you refer all your questions to Mr. Freeman? If there's anything that he can't cover, he will then put it over to Mr. Tarbert. So over to you, Ed, to present your report. Welcome to the meeting as well, Ed. It's been a long, it's been a long time since you spoke.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't think a meeting's run for that long without me saying anything. Thank you, Chair. So this report relates to an issue that arose back in 2019 when the Royal Devon NHS Foundation Trust commenced requesting contributions from large-scale residential developments in the district towards the impact of those developments on their services, in particular healthcare services within the area. Members may recall that this was a particular issue with the land swap application at Exeter Science Park, which was dealt with by Development Management Committee as it was at the time in 2019. Although there was not sufficient evidence or justification to seek a contribution in that case, it did set us down a path of working with the Trust to develop a robust methodology and basis for which contributions could be sought and calculated and justified. This work has been informed by a council opinion that we sought at the time of the Science Park application, and also 2 Secretary of State decisions which are referred to in the report, where similar contributions have been sought by NHS trusts in other parts of the country. The first of those decisions, the Walborough-Barton decision in Teignbridge, some members may well be familiar with, and I think has been referred to in some reports to Planning Committee recently. In that case, the Secretary of State felt that contributions towards healthcare, such as those sought by the RD&E NHS Foundation Trust, can only be justified where development is not known about and was not planned for, i.e. windfall developments that were not known about at the local plan stage and therefore couldn't be factored into infrastructure requirements at that stage. As a result of that, we continue to work with the Trust in terms of looking at how contributions in those circumstances would be calculated. However, a subsequent decision by the Secretary of State, also referred to in the report, at Ledbury in Herefordshire, slightly contradicted that previous decision and broadened the scope of where contributions could be sought to encompass not only those developments that are windfall developments and not previously known about, but also those that are identified in a local plan. In hindsight, this does seem logical, since whether or not a development is known about through the planning process or not does not actually have any bearing on the funding that the Trust receives, which is primarily based on forecasts in terms of population, which the bringing forward of development comes ahead of, and basically that calculation of their funding lags behind that process, and hence, as referred to in the report, we're talking about a period of a year, 18 months during which there is a funding shortfall. So discussions with the Trust have now reached a point where we think we've got a clear evidence base for seeking contributions, a clear methodology for calculating those, which is developed based on activity data that the Trust hold through interactions they have with our residents when they seek medical care from the Trust. And also evidence that's been provided in terms of the costs that are incurred by those interactions, such that we now feel we have a robust calculator to calculate contributions relative to the growth that's coming forward in the district. As referred to in the report, this is then discounted to take account of evidence we have about the number of occupants of new dwellings in the district that are already residents within the Trust's area and therefore do not place any additional demands on the Trust services. So on the basis of that calculator, we believe that it would now be appropriate to collect contributions from large-scale residential developments within the district. Obviously, this is still subject to the policies within the local plan in relation to viability testing. So obviously this could create circumstances on schemes that are not otherwise viable, where a judgment has to be made about where priorities lie in terms of funding and how this is weighed in the balance with other demands such as affordable housing, etc. However, we hope through this process that we can start to mitigate the impact of new development on the Trust's healthcare provision and help to ensure those services and the quality of those services is maintained for the residents of new developments in the district. So I just draw members to the recommendations at the start of the report, which ask members to note the discussions that have taken place between officers and the Royal Devon and Exeter NHS Foundation Trust with regard to developer contributions to healthcare services, and two, to agree that healthcare contributions calculated based on the methodology set out in this report be sought where requested from major new housing developments subject to viability testing where relevant. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. We'll start with outside of cabinet. So does I keep doing it outside of committee? Apologies. Is there anyone from outside of committee wishes to speak? No. So we'll move into committee, and first up is Councillor Eleanor Rollins.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to thank you, first of all, Ed, for this report, because every time I had a question, I found it was answered later in the report, apart from a few. And one of my first questions was, when whoever decides on how many people are in a particular area in order, to give the funding, so is that retroactive to the year the person moved in, or is there always a lag between the time the person moves in and the time the actual numbers catch up with the funding? That's my first question. Because if that's the case, then maybe we should be lobbying government to actually grant the funding retrospectively, so that the health authority doesn't have this lag, constant, what looks like a 3-year lag, which is most unfortunate, I'd say, given how much health budgets are being squeezed, especially in this area. The other thing I wanted to say was thank you for the diagram about the provenance, where people have come from when in the new developments, because it was very enlightening for more than just the healthcare. Up to 70% are from within the health authority, which is very interesting. So my point about that is obviously the health authority shouldn't have to run blind for 3 years before the funding starts arriving. That's unacceptable to my mind. We want the healthcare services to be properly funded, particularly in an area with a rising average age. But where was I going with that? If 70% of the population of these new areas, as would appear to be the case, comes from within the health authority area of Devon, then I imagine the health authority is best placed to know where these people are. I mean, probably better placed than we are, to be honest, to know if they're moving from one place to another. There was one point in the report that I found was a little alarming, sort of slightly Malthusian suggestion that if you build houses, people will have children. I thought that was a little, as a way of limiting the population, I'm not really particularly down with that. I think people need houses and they also need proper healthcare. So that was my question. So does the funding, is it backdated to the time that the development is completed and handed over, or is that something we should be lobbying for on behalf of the health authorities? Thank you for everything else.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ryan. We'll take another couple of speakers before we go back to Ed. So Councillor Ingham, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be quite happy to propose the recommendations, except for 2 words in the second item, which I want clarification on, and preferably removal of. And that would be in brackets where requested. And do you see on page 32, the top 2 lines there? It says the trust has been clear that they are only likely to make requests from major developments in the district comprising of 10 or more dwellings. Would it not be more appropriate if that line had said the trust has been clear that they will make requests on every development more than 10 dwellings, and that we remove those brackets? Because what I'm afraid of happening is that inadvertently they may or may not make requests, and so one set of developments have to contribute, and another one, because of, forgive me, incompetence, don't. I'd like it to be mandatory. Could I have a comment, please, whether it would be acceptable to just remove those 2 words from item from recommendation 2 that are in brackets? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ingham. I'll seek clarity from Ed first, and then I'll ask for a secondary afterwards. So Ed, over to you, if you're able to answer.
Thank you, Chair. If I just pick up on the first point, the second point first. I think in terms of the brackets in the recommendation, we do need the trust to actually make a submission to us and request the contribution, because as I've said in the report, the contributions will be calculated on a case-by-case basis, because the activity rates in different parts of the district are quite different. And so the contribution will be different in different parts of the district. And so a tailored contribution will need to be calculated by the trust. And we also, for our own records, require consultees to provide a justification with each request to justify why that contribution is necessary and justified in planning terms. So I don't think there's any way round that. We can't just do it automatically. We have to require consultees to do that. And I would say that that's common across the piece. So, for example, Devon County Council as the education authority, despite the fact you might argue that should be automatic, they would usually, in the past when we were doing that under 106, put in a request for every application and justify that. Obviously, we've moved on to SIL now in terms of education, so possibly a bad example. But I don't think there's a way around that, because every case has to be considered on its own merits separately. We can't just do that automatically. In terms of the point about lag time and backdating, my understanding is that it's not backdated, but probably best if I hand over to Dave, who would be the expert on the lag time and also what campaigning perhaps is taking place to government to change that funding mechanism. Over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to the committee for allowing me to join you, first of all. I think on the point about submissions, I mean, it is our intention to submit every time there is a development over 10 dwellings. So as long as we're aware that we will, essentially. And then in terms of the lag, essentially we have a shortfall for a period of about 12 to 18 months. And it's from the moment that a person moves into the healthcare area. So they take occupation of a new property up until the data is then flowed into the negotiation, I suppose, with commissioners on population size, and that typically takes about 12 to 18 months. It's not backdated. It's from the time the person comes into the local authority area. I think the question about lobbying government is a sort of interesting one, and in a way an easy one to ask and a difficult one to answer, because it obviously is something that takes place between the department, Secretary of State or Secretary of States and Treasury. We lobby, all NHS trusts lobby to get a proper fair settlement. The way the NHS is funded is a bit complicated. It isn't as simple as saying it's on population. We don't see the logic behind having this lag, but it would take probably quite an effort, I think, to move HM Treasury and the Department of Health and local government to change these commissioning arrangements, these funding arrangements. So I think it's probably more difficult than possibly you might think. I think that's all I can say on that one.
Thanks very much, Ed, and thanks very much, Dave, for your answers there. Councillor Ingham, are you happy with that, or do you want to come back?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm just concerned that why can't we have a mandatory checklist that you cannot approve, this council cannot approve planning application for more than 10 dwellings unless they've had a response from the trust. It doesn't mean to say that they've got to give the one we want, but that we're absolutely sure that they're not putting in a claim. I can't see that is a problem. They don't have to come up with a calculation if they don't want to apply, but we must have an answer from them. Otherwise, we're shortchanging the people of East Devon, which the whole point of this is to make sure that we're not shortchanged and that the trust is able to do what it intends to. Thank you, Chair.
So just going back to your earlier recommendation, that you asked to remove those two words, are you happy that those now stay in, or are you still pushing that they're kept out?
I'm asking that they're kept out, Chair, if someone will second that. I think we should set clear terms that we have to contact at least the trust to get their response. Yeah, one way or another.
Okay, can I get a seconder for that from anywhere on the floor? Councillor Bailey is seconding. Councillor Blakey, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. My personal view on how the NHS is funded is that it's the job of central government to do that. And I think that the NHS having to come to a district council to arrange to top up its income by plundering, if that's the right word, new development seems to me to be a bit odd. It's something which I think shouldn't be necessary, but accepting in these days it probably is. Having got that off my chest, I think if we look at the recommendation as is, I think it falls to the RD&E to apply for such funds as they think are as appropriate for any given development. I don't think that we should hold up a planning application because we're waiting for a response from the RT&E. By all means, let them know when the planning app is received. Let them state their case. But if they fail to do so, it's not for us to go running after an outside body to say, look, are you failing to get as much money out of this as you can? So for me, I would prefer to see the motion voted on as written in the recommendation. That is to include where requested, and leave the onus on the RD&E to make that request. That's all. Thanks.
So that's a proposal from yourself.
It is.
Thank you. So can I get a seconder for that from anyone?
Yes.
Councillor Skinner is seconding. So next up is Councillor Allen. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've been fighting for Section 106 monies to be devoted to health for the last 10 years. And I'm delighted to see that there is a proposal on the table. I tried to get an agreed developer contribution to the Honiton GP surgery expansion of £1 million, which this council turned down at the time because the planning officer said that it couldn't be done. So I'm delighted that the planning officers now are recommending this can be done. I'm delighted that we are considering supplementing the health service on the basis that it's an infrastructure requirement. And we ought to do all we can to make sure that this local authority has the best health service possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillor Howe, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. God, this doesn't bring back memories. This obviously came up first when I was Chair of Planning, or Development Control as it used to be. And I'm heartened to see we finally got on the same page as the Health Care Trust. And I will be fully supporting this. I think it's essential. As Councillor Allen has said, one way or another, it's about time we caught up with things. And I'm glad to see the two bodies, East Devon District Council and the NHS locally, have got on the same page. And as such, I don't think we've got any option but to support it. Unfortunately, I cannot support the recommendation to change the wording, but I am fully supportive of the agenda papers and what they're proposing. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor Skinner.
I'm going to reiterate quickly on exactly what Councillor Harris said, and he took the words right out of my mouth. He very often does. He's very good at that. And he speaks very eloquently, and the support, and the reason why I seconded, and I might just add to that, Chair, through you, is the reason I seconded is because I absolutely support what Councillor Blakey said, and that is we can't be holding up planning applications and chasing people down on the basis are they going to make a request for funding or not. The request should be there, which is quite rightly, whereas in the wording it says where appropriate. And on that basis, I'm going to want to see that left in, and then if they do or they don't, it will come up to them and it will be on their stall. And certainly applications should not just be waiting on the basis that somebody may or may not respond. We don't do it with anybody else, and we certainly shouldn't be making a case here. Planning law is planning law. It is time constrained and it needs to be moving on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Skinner. So with no other members wishing to speak, we will start off with Councillor Allen's proposal. Sorry, Councillor Ingham's proposal. And that is, well, Anita, could you just summarise for us, please?
Certainly. So that, Chair, is as drafted in the report, but with the deletion in part 2 of the recommendation, deletion of the words in brackets where requested. So I guess this is an amendment to remove the where requested from the recommendation. And we'll take that as an amendment first. The alternative, Chair, is we take Councillor Blakey's proposal to be an amendment to what Councillor Ingham had already proposed, because we're talking about the same wording, but just with the two words removed.
I'm happy to take, well, legal guidance here. Which way we take first?
I think Councillor Blakey's is an amendment to Councillor Ingham's original proposal. So Councillor Ingham was proposing the draft wording with where requested removed. I think Councillor Blakey's subsequent proposal is an amendment to that. So we would take the amendment to include, which would be to include the words as lost it, where requested, to Councillor Ingham's proposal.
Perfect. So just for clarity, members, the first vote will be on the recommendations as listed in the reports. That's what is classed as the amendment. So the first vote will be, we are voting on the recommendations as listed down.
So to include the words as requested to Councillor Ingham's original recommendation, because we take the amendment first. Sorry, Tara, this is that's confusing.
Yeah, no
so
problem.
If members are clear, that will be a vote yes in favour of the motion, no if you're against, and an electronic hand to abstain.
On a point of order, a proposal can't be to negate a previous recommendation.
It's not, Councillor Allen, it's just an amendment to it.
It's just an amendment, Councillor Allen. It's the wording where requested. So the substantive motion is the same. It's just the two words, whether the two words are in or out.
Thanks
very much. I think Councillor Allen's correct, actually.
Sorry. I'd rather take the advice of our solicitor, and that's what we're going to do. Can we please take it to a vote?
For those watching online, the vote is now taking place. So we have 3 votes in support of the motion, and no, oh, sorry, apologies, it's changing. We have 5 votes in support, we have 3 abstentions and 1 against, so that motion is carried.
So that, Chair, is the motion to the amendment to include the words where requested into Councillor Ingham's original proposal. So we then go to Councillor Ingham's proposal as requested, which coincidentally is the same, as amended, which is the same wording as is in the report. So effectively it is your report wording.
And then we take another vote on.
Yeah, so members, if you you have the wording in the report, vote yes if you're in favour of the motion as it is actually drafted, and no if you're against, or an electronic hand.
I'm really confused because I thought we'd just voted on that. I thought we'd voted with the wording in brackets.
We have voted on that, but we voted on to insert the amendment, and now we're voting on the main proposal. Okay, so
but it's the same.
It's the exact same, exactly.
But you voted on the amendment to related to the wording, the where requested wording, because we take the amendment first.
Chair,
So
could I please have a word, please? Just for simple clarity. It's all very simple. The simplicity of this is, are we voting on what is recommended in the papers? That's all I wanted to know. That's all I said. I thought that's what Councillor Blakey's done. I supported what's in the papers we were voting for.
Yes.
And then there's an amendment, but we first vote on this. Is that what we've just voted for?
We've just voted on this, which was an amendment.
It wasn't. It was.
The first proposal was Councillor Ingham's proposal, which was the wording as drafted, but without the words. Sorry, Councillor, I was getting there. Without the words where requested. So that was Councillor Ingham's first proposal. That was the first proposal on the table. The second proposal from Councillor Blakey was that the wording as drafted in the report was recommended. they're not different motions, they're the same substantive motion, but with two words differently. So I've treated it as an amendment because it was an amendment to Councillor Ingham's proposal. But I think members are clear on what you're voting on. You may disagree with the procedure, but you're clear on what you're voting on. So I would suggest, Chair, unless there is some uncertainty about what members are voting on, that we move to the vote.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anita. So as written in the report, yes or no, please vote now.
For the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place, and we have 9 votes in support, so that is carried.
Thank you very much, and apologies for the confusion there. We'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the role and function of settlements. It's the last agenda item of the day, so over to Ed Freeman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to say thank you to Dave Tarbert for his time on that previous item as well. This next item, role and function of settlements. This report looks at the issue of settlement hierarchy, which is a key element of developing a strategy to distribute development in the district in the new local plan. This issue was highlighted as part of the issues and options consultation we carried out earlier this year, with the responses very finely balanced between either retaining the current settlement hierarchy or having fewer villages within the hierarchy, or indeed having more villages within the hierarchy, with 83 respondents proposing alternatives. So unfortunately, there's relatively little we can take from the consultation responses we've had so far in terms of this, because the responses were so finely balanced between the options. The issues relevant to defining a settlement hierarchy are discussed in detail in the document appended to this report, which it looks in detail at issues such as the population makeup of each settlement, the economy and economic role of each settlement, and the community facilities and services found within them. Fundamentally, those settlements with the higher population, greater range of jobs, community facilities, transport services, all of which are serving a wider area, will sit at the top of the hierarchy, while the smaller settlements with fewer jobs, a smaller range of facilities, while still performing an important role locally and for their local community and area, would sit lower in this hierarchy. In considering these issues, regards have been had to the relationship between nearby settlements, and in the case of Exton and West Clist, members will see that they have been elevated to tier 4 of the hierarchy as a result of their relationship with adjacent areas, which has been added to the facilities, services and factors within the settlements themselves. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to attempt to summarise all of the information that's in the attached report, which gives an immense amount of information about each of the settlements, but happy to try and answer any questions that members may have. It's important to note that while some settlements may have a wider range of services and facilities within the wider parish than indicated in the study, we have only factored in those that are within easy walking distance of the settlement itself. So, for example, I've already had some email exchange with a resident at Clist St George concerned that we hadn't factored in some of the facilities within the wider parish, in particular Darts Farm shop, which is outside of the settlement itself. So just so that members are aware of that, and obviously that may be something members want to discuss. Ultimately, this is a draft evidence document to inform production of the local plan. So asking members to consider the study, welcome any feedback and comments at this stage. This isn't, probably won't be the finalised document. I think, as we say, in terms of next steps, there's further work in terms of confirming some of the information within the document and finalising it as an evidence document. One certain thing that has come to light is in regards to Exton in the study, there is an additional bus service that's not been factored into that. And so in one of the tables, I think it's the table where we talk about the services in individual settlements, which starts, I think, on page 33 of the report, where it gets to Exton. There should be a tick in the box well, sorry, a yes in the box for less than hourly bus service, as well as the hourly bus service, because there are in fact two services that service Exton with different frequencies. So apologies for that error that we've subsequently picked up on. That will obviously be corrected in the final version, as long as along with any amendments that members may wish us to go away and look at and make as well. So I recommend that item to members. Sorry, I don't have the recommendation itself in front of me, but ultimately seeking members' views on the draft evidence document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed, for your report. We'll start outside of committee, and first up is Councillor Nick Hookway.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you also to Ed Freeman for producing this report, which I welcome. I think it's an excellent report. However, I would like the committee to consider adding one additional feature, one term under the local facilities and services table, which is on page 31. The table consists of strategic facilities and services, which I think is fine, but under local facilities and services, can I suggest that playing pitches are added to the criteria so that we can actually see which settlements have playing pitches? I hope that you will agree with me on this, because I think it will help the committee when it comes to make its decisions on the playing pitch strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Apologies, I was on mute. Thanks very much for that, Councillor Hookway. Next up is Councillor Bruce Sarum. Over to you, Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, fellow committee members. I was looking at point 3.9 of this report, and I would like to make the suggestion for a recommendation to add in as well, that the Planning Committee consider the role and function of the settlements draft and endorse its use, blah, 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 and then put an addition to it being informed by other work on factors such as housing employment need, land availability, environmental constraints, because I think that covers most of what is relevant to be looked at. Given the fact that I note that Exmouth is going to be in tier 1 as a principal settlement, so I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and hopefully this amendment which I've suggested members might find appropriate, because clearly what we don't want to have in tier 1 necessarily, or possibly tier 2 is overdevelopment of sites. Although I know that sites will be called up by the HELA process. So that's what I was going to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bruce. If there's no one, Councillor Paul Miller.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, to completely agree with what Councillor Hookway said, he stole my thunder on that. But also agreeing with Councillor de Sarum, but to add as well on transport constraints, Exmouth is slightly unique in the district in the sense that we have such a high level of out commuting from Exmouth to Exeter, which, by the way, Leader, is probably why I'm in favour of a Metro Mayor. But also we have terrible transport links. And I think it's vital that we take that into consideration, really terrible transport links relative to similar towns, similar sized towns across the country. So I hope that especially when we're considering development, we do bear those facts in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. We'll move it into committee now. Councillor Rollins, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'm a little bit confused about how certain places have ended up in certain tiers. I'm just quite confused that Budleigh Salterton and Broadclist are viewed in the same way, because Budleigh Salterton has a whole high street. Broadclist has one shop and one charity shop. So, I understand there's other factors that go into that, including public transport and the presence of medical facilities and schools. And we have all of those in Broadclist, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were very comparable in terms of what services they offer. The other miracle is that you managed to elevate Westclist to being its own village. So bravo. It is part of Broadclist, by the way. It's not its own village. So as I always go on like a broken record, Westclist is part of Broadclist. It is not its own settlement yet. Well, possibly ever to be discussed. So yeah, and I would like to know how Westcliff made it into this list as its own settlement.
Thanks very much, Councillor Rollins. Councillor Ingham, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Bearing in mind that this is a draft document, I would say that any councillor that wants additions to be made should contact Ed Freeman. And I don't think this is the arena where we should decide at a whim what should be included or not. That's up to Ed Freeman and his team to do the next version and present it to us when they're ready to do so. Which is why, Chair, I'm quite happy to propose the recommendation as printed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ingham. Can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Blakey. Thank you very much. Councillor Howe, over to you.
Thank you. And now we've got a proposal on the table. Unfortunately, I can't agree with the proposal. I think we need to make amendments to this. And I'll start with an easy one, because on planning, we've seen it for years. We've seen communities wanting to build, not being allowed to because they're in the open countryside. And we've got here tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And at tier 4, and reading down in 3.7, all of the service villages in tier 4 have at least 7 of the 10 local facilities, excluding playing pitches, which I think should be there. But in general, it is less clear cut. For smaller settlements, there is a risk that the loss of 1 or 2 more facilities in the future could have a significant impact, meaning that they will no longer play the role of a service village. And that's the fundamental. Anything below tier 4 is cast out in the open. And time after time after time, we get these villages wanting just a few more houses. They want a bit more and everything else. And we keep saying no for sensible current policy reasons. But this is our future policy and this is our chance to get it right. So I want to see tier 5, 6, and 7, each one with 1 less facility in, and consequently that boundary will be tighter and tighter on them. But we need to allow more villages to have a tiny bit of growth. And this is the only opportunity. Actually, we could go up to 10 as far as I was concerned, down to 1, just 1 local thing. But I think that might be kicking it a bit too far down the field. But this is not adequate. We need to do more. So I fully support Councillor Hookway's suggestion. We should have playing pitches as part of it. We've got leisure centres. What's the difference? Provided you can get exercise, it's one or the other. And I think they should count. And I absolutely implore our officers, and hopefully this committee will back me, that we go further than tier 4, that we do at least 5 and 6, if not further. But I'll leave that to committee to have that debate.
Thanks very much. Councillor Skinner, could you just put yourself on mute?
I thought you were going to ask for a seconder for his recommendation, which is what I was going to do.
If that's a proposal, yep, you can second it.
I'm happy to make it a proposal. The only question I was having was how far down that list we feel comfy as a committee to go. I certainly think 3 more would be adequate, but as I say, it's how far we want to push it down that list, in what scale to give Mr. Freeman that challenge to work out, shall we say?
It wholeheartedly agree with everything you've just said, Mike. It's just a fine balance and how we need to get the policy right of development in the open countryside to making small hamlets and villages actually sustainable for future generations. And that's, I think, something that we need to iron out through the policy.
If I could, Chair, just come back on that. You are absolutely. I think we've got to be careful with the words, because we will never make a small community sustainable in planning terms and Mr. Freeman's terms. But what I don't want to see them is carry on the passage of death, if you get my meaning, of less and less facilities year after year. That's what we need to stall, is just maintain the facilities they have by just bringing a little bit of growth to each one. But as I say, I think the easy way is to extend those tiers down further. And I'd wholeheartedly recommend 3 tiers. 3 tiers. I'm happy 3 tiers. 3 tiers more. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Are we treating that as a recommendation, Chair, or do you want to keep going for a bit?
We are indeed. It's
Okay.
been proposed and seconded by Councillor Skinner.
I have some clearer wording then, Councillor Howe. One of those.
Should we come back to you, Mike? Should we give you
Yeah,
5 seconds?
Okay. Yeah. Or pop it in the chat.
Ed, just coming back to you on that, are you happy with what's been proposed so far? There's nothing burning to make it stop.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it would be useful to just come back on a couple of points that have been made. I'm very happy to go and look at the incorporating playing pitches into the hierarchy and see what impact that would have. Clearly, they are important facilities. We need to look at, I suspect it's probably more complicated than it first appears, because there would be some which might be strategic in nature and others that are simply local facilities, and we'd have to marry that up with work we've been doing on the playing pitch strategy, but happy to take that away to have a look at that. I would say in response to Councillor de Saram's comments that I do see that slightly separate in terms of looking at the constraints of particular settlements. We obviously need to look at that when we start to look at individual sites and where growth might go. I don't see that constraints would necessarily affect where a settlement sits in terms of this hierarchy. But obviously it would impact in terms of where growth should go in the future, which is a slightly separate issue that we'll come to further down the road in terms of preparation of the local plan. In terms of Councillor Rylance's comments, I would say I think there's a quite useful table and comparison between Budleigh, Salterton and Broadclyst on page 33 in the appended report that shows that the reason they're in the same hierarchy fundamentally is because they have very similar ranges of facilities. In terms of, I think the local facilities and services are equal to each other. And then in terms of strategic facilities and services, you'll see that each has 3 of the identified criteria. In the case of Budleigh Salterton, an hourly bus service, a hospital, an emergency service facility. In the case of Broadclyst, an hourly bus service, secondary school and leisure centre. So I think they are directly comparable in terms of the work that we've done. In terms of Westclyst, I've always thought of it as a hamlet, certainly within the ward and parish of Broadclyst, but we're only referring to settlements in terms of this, and I would say a hamlet is still a settlement. But I think we're acknowledging through this work that it has seen, shall we say, very substantial growth in terms of the 2 major developments there, which I think we need to be mindful of in terms of the new policies through the new local plan and its status as a settlement through that work. In terms of perhaps the main point, Chairman, you asked me to come in on, is in Councillor Howe's point. I suppose I would just urge caution in terms of, I'm not sure what the distinction between additional tiers would be and what the criteria for defining them would be, as distinct from the other tiers within this piece of work. So if that is members wish to add additional tiers, it would be useful to understand how those should be defined and should be distinct from the tiers that we have. But I would say that just because something doesn't fall within these tiers and perhaps wouldn't have a built-up area boundary doesn't mean that your policies that you then look to develop as we progress through the local plan process doesn't permit growth and development of a suitable scale within those areas. We already have policies that permit exception sites in rural locations. Neighbourhood plans are obviously promoting development in those rural locations where we don't have built-up area boundaries, and settlements are not currently within that hierarchy. And of course, it is open to us with a clean slate for a new local plan to develop other policies that might help to promote and enable growth in those locations that meet members' aspirations. There are, of course, risks in terms of developing additional tiers and potentially putting built-up area boundaries around settlements that don't have a good level of services and facilities, in the sense that that then makes growth within those areas permissive under policy, and you could end up with growth and development in those areas that is perhaps not what you or the community wish to see, and it may be that a more tailored approach to each settlement or those circumstances through policies rather than through additional tiers may achieve members' aspirations in a more controlled and appropriate way. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Allen, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. If we look at the National Planning Policy Framework, the second section of it refers to achieving sustainable development. And when I was chairing the forum which developed the first, well, the last local plan, we made a big stress on sustainability. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of the sustainability objective, which is partly what Mike Howe was referring to villages for. The objective of the local plan is to achieve sustainable development, and it has three overarching objectives according to the National Policy Planning Framework. It's an economic objective, a social objective, and an environmental objective. And when I look at this hierarchy, I think the evidence is extremely good, but all too often our debates revolve around the aspect of housing instead of sustainable communities. And I think that as an evidence base, I have no trouble in agreeing with the recommendation. The issue becomes one, what do we do about it in terms of policies? And for that reason, I particularly don't feel the employments section has really gone any further than simply counting sheds or units. And that's not what economic development is about. So I look to Mr. Hayward or Councillor Hayward or Superintendent Hayward or whatever his name is these days to put forward the plans and policies inside a planning framework for a good economic objective for sustainable development across the rural, coastal and Exeter influenced areas. As regards the social objective, we can't have a vibrant and healthy community without good healthcare. We've already talked about that earlier on today. And to me, absolutely important within that is playing fields, health development through exercise. So I do think we missed the trick in not including playing pitches and various sports facilities of that kind. But when it comes to an environmental objective, here we're looking at the use of land, improving biodiversity, natural resources, and minimizing waste and pollution. And there's not really much in the settlement hierarchy that talks to that particular issue. So I think that there's a lot of work to do, Mr. Freeman. I'm sure Keith Lane's done a fabulous job so far, but I think there's more work to do in terms of some of the areas which will eventually need to form the backbone for policies for economic, social and environmental objectives and achieving sustainable development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillor Bailey, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for the report, and also thank you to Councillor Hookway. I agree with the comment that he has made about playing pitches. In the report, it says, I think, that officers will get in touch with the parishes to check about the facilities. So presumably that will happen, because I know that in at least one of mine, there's a disagreement with what's stated to be in the chart. So hopefully there'll be everybody, all the parishes will be emailed. When it comes to the hierarchy, I do tend to agree with Ed Freeman. I think Councillor Howe talked about the passage of death in the rural settlements, but I think we're in danger of having death by multiple tiers. So I think generally we need to be consistently trying to house people where there are facilities, and I think that having more tiers will just add to confusion, and I don't think personally it's really necessary, and I think we need to be protecting the open countryside. So I'm reasonably happy with things as they are, thank you, subject to Councillor Hookway's comment.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Davey, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you for a very thorough report, and it's very interesting to see these comparisons. And like some other councillors, I was a bit surprised that Budley was kind of bundled along with Lympstone, because knowing both places quite well and frequently travelling there, they seem very different to me. But it is interesting that Lympstone has reasonably good bus access, a very good train service, and although it only has one shop, it has many of the other facilities. So it's kind of interesting when you start to reflect that actually, yes, they are similar in terms of the facilities they have. As an Exmouth councillor, I appreciate having Exmouth at the top, and it clearly is in a different league from other towns in terms of just the sheer number of people living there, and its communications and its services. But I would kind of caution against thinking therefore we can locate all development there, because there's got to be a limit how far Exmouth can expand, and we're already getting to the point where there are people living in Exmouth who are further from the facilities than many houses in the countryside are from their nearest village. So we need to be careful about thinking, oh yes, there's plenty of services there within the built-up area boundary, and therefore we can just make it bigger. So that would just be my one word of caution. In terms of sustainability, which obviously is absolutely crucial as we attempt to reduce our use of fossil fuels and move into a low carbon economy, we need to consider perhaps how we locate development to consider the future of possibly home working, which has been forced on us by the pandemic, but quite likely is there to stay. And as people move to electric cars also, depending of course how the electricity is generated, they are low carbon vehicles. So we may have to look at how we locate development and how we redefine sustainability and where development may be sustainable. I don't agree that we need lots of other tiers, but I did wonder whether we should just include a tier 5 with a sort of other, with perhaps distinct settlements, shall we say, that just have fewer than X number of facilities and services, just so that some of those places don't feel they have been completely ignored in the local plan, that we do have an acknowledgement that those places exist, that they are bundles of settlements, groups of houses, and that there may be, I totally agree with Councillor Howe, we've got to consider locating small-scale development in areas where it may actually lead to either the retention of the facilities that are there, or even providing more facilities. And I was a bit concerned that if the village wasn't there, did that imply that there would be no development there? And Ed kind of answered that question. So I'm not so concerned about that. But I think perhaps it would be sensible to just have a sort of other category for those places that might feel they've been completely overlooked otherwise.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Councillor Skinner, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And one of the things I wanted very much support was with what Councillor Hay was suggesting, and he's got my full support on the principles of what he was saying. We've sat at development management now for well over 12 months, and we have had many applications, quite several applications. I think Councillor Hay would agree that we've turned over against officer recommendation, and many that have been on the sustainability issue. And those recommendations that we've turned over have come through the majority of the planning committee. Many planning committee members have felt that certain applications through our policies aren't quite fit for purpose anymore, and that we have turned these things over. And the fear of that, of course, from Ed's perspective and the planners, is that what we don't want to do is open the floodgates up to places where we don't want it to happen. And I think where Councillor Hay was coming from, and what I'm very supportive of, and whether it's more tiers or whether it's another way of doing it, that was just Councillor Hay chucked it out there to say, look, we need to be thinking outside of the box. And I think whether to pin him down on 3 more tiers or whatever was not really fair. And I think where we're trying to get to is a place that if you're not within these tiers, that's it, you're thrown to the wolves, and that is not fair. And I can give you an example of the very village in which I sit in. I wouldn't be, Tallerton sits right between Fennerton with a train station and Wimple with a train station. It wouldn't be 2 or 3 mile within. If you sat in Tallerton, you think, if I want to catch a train, I've got a choice. I could go either one way or another. In fact, it's quite well sat as far as facilities regarding communication is concerned. It's also very well sat, and I live in Larkby, which is another little hamlet, very small, but it's just right on the edge of part of Tallerton. That is actually on Daisy Mount roundabout, and I can get onto the A30, 1.5 miles, 1.75 miles, and I'm on the A30. We're just about to have a service station, I believe they're trying to get through at Daisy Mount. This is an example, and I'm picking Tallerton because I happen to know it. That's not the only village. There are many villages in our parish that we shouldn't just be leaving to the wolves on the basis because somebody comes up this word. Sustainability, I've had, I don't know how many years I've had sustainability rocked at me, and I think it's in some senses, it's a bit of a nonsense. What I will say is this: at the same time as saying all of that, I wouldn't either want the flood doors opened to some large, and Tallerton, I'll speak about my own village because I know it. Tallerton to have 20 houses in one hit would be a lot. That would be a lot too much. I know Exmouth takes hundreds and many others do. But these little villages, we're talking maybe half a dozen, maybe 2 or 3, 1 or 2 hither or dither, 1 or 2, what I call fitting in type of policy. And there are many villages with this sort of fitting in a corner type of almost windfall type policy. But as soon as anybody tries to do anything, it's always sustainability and it's all out into the no good and all the rest of it. And I think why I very much support where Councillor Harry and I absolutely agree on this is we don't either want our planning committees faced with members turning over our policies. We need our policies to be in tune with what members are thinking and feeling. And I think that's really fundamentally important. And I know there are villages around, I mean, perhaps Councillor Bailey might suggest, we've got Aylesbury, for example, which is a small village that has a pub. It's very close to the main road. But it's a small village and it has its heart and its breath and it doesn't need to be overdeveloped. And that's the type of thing I'm talking about and many others. So, Chair, through you, I'm not comfortable in going forward with this because there is something else that we need to think about those other villages. And I know Ed Freeman has touched on there are other ways of doing it and one thing and another. But that is as fundamentally important as the things that he touched on. It's as fundamentally important to have that within this document process so as we can all fully understand and support as to what is trying to be achieved. And it's as fundamentally important as everything else that's in the document. Not let's get this through and then we'll try to pick up on what that bit is at the end. And we may try to get something to come in or not. That isn't right. And I'd like that to be as clear. And if we can't be done here, fine. But I'd like the officers, and perhaps integration with us members, certainly through this committee, to discuss it and talk about it and see where that lands and how it fits. I don't have answers, to be honest, Chair. I don't have answers for it sat here and now. But I do know that this isn't wholly right. Lots of great stuff, but it isn't wholly right. And it's not something that I want to support in its present form, because I just think it needs a bit more work about those other small villages. And I would like to think that Councillor Bailey would work along with us as well in saying that there's another option for some other things and little bits and pieces here and there. I'm sure everybody gets absolute the drift of what I'm talking about, at the same time having the protection that people can't just come along and overdevelop some of these very small villages that don't want too much development, but they want a little bit. I'll leave it to that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Skinner. Councillor Ingham, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to change my proposal, bearing in mind what members have said. And they're absolutely right that these things are relevant, but this is a draft document. And what I say, I really, when you bear in mind how many hours, days, weeks Ed Freeman's team have taken to compile this, and we think we can chat it through in half an hour, make some changes and come up with an appropriate revision. That's just not right. So, Chair, what I'd like to do to highlight, first of all, that this is a draft document, I want to change the first recommendation and add a second. So the first one, the recommendation where it says the role and function of settlements dash draft, I want us to say the role and function of settlements as a draft document and endorse its use as evidence. Okay, so it's making quite clear to everyone, this is a draft document. And then to go on as a second proposal that all members send to Mr. Freeman any amendments or additions that they desire to be considered for this evidence document, and that Mr. Freeman reports back to this committee with his recommendations for revisions at the next meeting. So let's crack on with this and give Mr. Freeman all the observations we've got, and then let him come back and say, I've looked at these 10 items and I'm saying 5 are good and 5 are bad, and here's why. Okay, and we hear from him and give him time to consider our thoughts. That's my proposal, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Ingham. Ed, can I just bring you in at that point? And obviously, there's proposals being put forward, and just obviously whether it is a possibility, if it can be fulfilled for the next meeting, if that doesn't put you under too much work pressures.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I kind of saw bringing this report that we would hopefully receive feedback from members, which we've been doing, and that's really useful. Comments and feedback. I would agree with Councillor Ingham's comment about not being too prescriptive about what the solutions may be here and now, because I think as officers we need to go away and take on board the comments that members have made and look at what might be the best solutions and come back to you with some recommendations. So I certainly hear the view that we need to be careful how settlements that have not quite reached the threshold of tier 4 in terms of the work we've done so far are handled, and making sure that they are brought into this work in some way, but looking also at how we ensure that they don't stagnate and an element of growth is incorporated. And as I said, it may be that that's part of this work. It may be part of wider work we're doing on rural policies through the new local plan, and that we can reassure you in terms of that. But I certainly hear that message clear, and there's a number of other issues that have been highlighted that I'm happy to take away and pick up on. And if members want to email further issues, that would also be helpful. In terms of timescales, though, Chair, they are quite tight. I mean, I know our next meeting isn't until the 7th of September, but in terms of report writing, they do have to be written quite a long way in advance. So I think if additional comments were to be made, I think we would, realistically, I suspect we would be coming back to you the meeting after the September meeting, if we're going to give members a chance to write in with additional comments, because I think the draft reports have to be written by the end of this week for the 7th of September, if I recall, or certainly very soon. I think if that's something that's acceptable to members, then happy to do that and bring a revised version back to what would presumably be an October meeting. In fact, I think we've got, looking at the schedule, we've actually got a report on built-up area boundaries scheduled for November, which ties in quite a lot with this. So we could probably combine the two, perhaps bring that forward to October. I'd have to look at that, but I don't think September would be achievable.
Thanks very much. So, Councillor Ingham, you're happy with that? And that's a change to your proposals. Who seconded your first proposal?
Councillor Bailey.
Councillor Bailey, are you happy with that change?
And then we've got Councillor House.
I'm not that happy because I'm quite happy with this at the moment. So I think I won't second, but I'm sure somebody else.
So is there a seconder for Councillor Ingham's proposal?
Chair, if I could, I'd like to withdraw my proposal, and I'm happy to second Councillor Ingham's proposal as it stands.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe.
Hang on a minute, Chair, he's got to ask me first. I seconded it. Am I happy to?
It's withdrawn, Councillor Skinner, you're out.
You're out.
He's withdrawn it. There's nothing there to support.
Councillor Howe, you're up next anyway.
Thank you. And it is that point. I need to come back to Councillor Bailey next door to me here. Ed was not disingenuous. I wouldn't say that, Ed, but you were quite rightly making a point against my argument, of which I understand and undertake. But in Councillor Bailey's point, I don't expect to see in the future large-scale development in our smallest villages. And Councillor Skinner made the same point. But at the same time, 5 homes over a 5, 10 or 15-year period in our smallest villages, 10 homes in the next scale up, 15 homes in the next scale up, that's not unreasonable. That is just keeping, well, it's not even keeping pace with the way things going, but it just means our villages, particularly our rural villages that are in the countryside, they're farming communities, most of them, and everything else, just have that tick over of people being able to stay local to their families if that's necessary or anything else. And it's just that point I wanted to make. We can't put all our eggs in just 15, 20 odd communities. We need to get a balance in this, and we just need a little bit of leeway with our smallest villages so they can go back and think about what they want and how they want it, and just support them get just a few. And I do mean that sincerely. Just a tiny tickle of homes in them to keep them just ticking over. And that's what we need. Whereas at present, we don't have that at all. And Mr. Freeman knows very well, we've struggled for years over this very subject because frankly, neighbourhood plans are not there in most of the cases what have been brought before us, but the parishes have supported these developments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope Councillor Ingham's proposal goes through and we get a good result in November when we're looking at it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. I think we've pretty much done this to death. So we'll take Councillor Hayward and Councillor Allen, and then we'll take it to a vote. So Councillor Hayward, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I suppose the point I'd like to make is going back to Councillor Allen as to what title you want to ascribe to me. Probably easier to look at your screen because it's written on there. If we call each other councillor, it's a lot easier. In terms of the other item, the first three tiers are quite clear cut. It's the fourth one that will always be contentious and will split decision and will certainly split opinion. If I refer to child stock, and I'll say this in my capacity as a ward member of this committee rather than as their clerk. If you look at child stock's local facilities and services, it scores 7, which puts it in tier 4. The convenience shop and the post office are the same thing. And Councillor Howe hit on a point earlier about the loss of one of these can have a profound effect. The convenience store and post office combined in child stock is up for sale. It does have a pub. It has a building. The pub is closed. It's just been registered as an asset of community value, but it has no pub. The open space in child stock is the play area, or it's actually the entire parish is an open space because it's an open countryside. So if you reassess those, it has 4. So straight away it falls out of tier 4 and falls into the other tiers that Councillor Howe alluded to. Similarly, if we look at what the parishes want, and I'm very interested in the concept that when we get to this further breaking down and assessment, that we talk to all the parishes. So invite them to a symposium, a conference, a Zoom meeting, whatever, and get their opinions, because they will all vary to what we think. So child stock, from their neighbourhood plan, is actually quite happy not to expand. That's their preferred status. All Saints is very much the same, and that's not my view. This is the view of the parish councils that I clerk for. Membury, however, is very keen to have some more housing, and it was quite disgruntled to be put into the unsustainable category, and in fact its own neighbourhood plan has encouraged that. But if we look at the recent house building and I particularly hone in on All Saints and child stock, houses that have been built unfortunately have not been for local people. They have turned into Airbnbs. They've been turned into second homes. They've been built by persons claiming to want to do the right thing, but as soon as they're built, they've then been sold to people who have used them as their second homes. So in terms of that building, that's not helping child stock one iota. It's not supporting the local economy. It's not bringing jobs, apart from minor maintenance on the buildings and some cleaning work. So I think we do need to talk to those communities, certainly talk to those parish councils, and then they in turn go back out to their communities via their parish council meetings and ask, what is it you really want? Because we can't speak for them. We think we can, but we can't. We mustn't speak for them. We must ask them to participate. Now, you might say their opportunity to participate was in this process. And I know that the response rate from some parish councils and some communities was quite light. We need to find different ways of engaging with them. Perhaps the old ways are not fit for purpose anymore. So I'm happy to support what's been proposed and thank Mr. Freeman for this very interesting piece of work. Even going forward for everyone on this committee, and in fact every councillor, some fascinating data in there, and I'll certainly be getting this bound and kept on my bookshelf because it's very helpful indeed going forward for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Hayward. Just on your last point on working with local parishes, we're doing a lot of work on surrounding neighbourhood plans and these forums, which we will be engaging with the local parishes on. Councillor Allen, over to you.
Councillor Allen is currently on mute at the moment.
Yes, I just note that Councillor Hayward wants to be called Currer Paul Hayward, so I'll do that in future. The point I want to make about the economic side of things and the sustainability side of things is beautifully illustrated on page 23 of the report, or your page 61. you can see that there are some very clear nodes of employment, and also the flow diagrams that we've seen show the commuting routes. And I think that it's very easy to look at the role and function of settlements, but we also need to look at the flows of employment. If we really want to cut down on carbon and travel, we need to improve employment in certain areas. And Honiton, to me, I know I'm the local councillor there. I know Jake Bonatta is watching me, so good for you. But we need Honiton to be considered in its employment role, covering a lot of the green areas, the rural areas. We need Sidmouth and Seaton, as well as Exmouth, to be considered from the employment that they generate. We need to make sure that the employment generated in improving these settlements is actually going to contribute to reductions in poverty and increases in wage rates. And this is all relevant to where we choose to encourage development. And that's why I think Councillor Haywood has a critical role in this particular planning strategy to come up with how rural and coastal, as well as Exeter environs, should develop a balanced community with good jobs for the local communities. Now, in the process of that, I noticed that Dunkeswell is actually doing extremely well in terms of employment. It's doing that because we've allowed a limited amount of rural employment to develop in a location which actually thoroughly deserves a school. Now, if we put an emphasis on getting the right facilities into Dunkeswell, it could well be a node for employment and sustainable development. Likewise, Seaton ought to be given a lot more emphasis in terms of employment. And we've been struggling with that for a long, long time. So, as I said before, this is a good evidence document, but it should not be the only basis on which our policies are developed, and not the only basis on which we target development. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Allen. So, Councillor Bailey, I'll come to you just to finish off. And then
Oh,
we'll
no,
take
sorry. I just wanted to say, can I say something at the end before the meeting closes?
Yeah, of course. So, Anita, did you get all of the the proposal from Councillor Ingham? And can you just sum up for us, please?
Certainly, Chair, and apologies for my phone at some point that went off. So, Councillor Ingham, I think I caught what you said, but please correct me if I'm not correct. Your revised proposal, and everybody's agreed it, so we've got no other proposals to consider, is that recommendation 1 becomes that Strategic Planning Committee consider the findings of the role and function of the settlements as a draft report and endorse its use. So just clarifying that it's making it clearer that it's a draft report. I've just lost Councillor Ingham on my screen, so I can't see him. So that's correct on 1. I've got you back there now. And then adding a 2 that, and please just check my wording, all members should send to Mr. Freeman all comments and amendments that they wish to be taken into account. Mr. Freeman to then report back to the committee, and I've just tweaked this wording slightly, so report back to the committee at a meeting after the September meeting. So to give Ed September, but to reflect that it will be a meeting after that. Everyone happy?
Andrew, you want to come in just before we go to the vote?
I really just wanted to say that when we say all members, it must be all members of the council, because all members of the council represent all the settlements. It's not just members of the Strategic Planning Committee that represent those settlements. So everybody must be invited to put in their responses.
No problem. So can we just make that a DL council email after the meeting that we send it out to everyone for comment?
Mm-hmm. And if Councillor Ingham's content, I can show that as all members of the council. Yeah. With a thumbs up. Everybody content with that? Do you want me to read it again, members, or happy to go to a vote?
I think we've got it. So if we just take that to a vote, members, if you do the green ticks, if you're in favour, red crosses if you're against.
For those watching online, the vote is currently taking place. So we have 10 votes in support of that motion, so that's carried.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thank you very much, Shanita, for the clarification there. So that brings our meeting to an end. So I'd like to thank everyone, including any of the members of the public watching online, for taking part. Can I remind all those present, apologies, I did say Councillor Bailey would like to speak. So just before we end, Councillor Bailey, over to you.
Sorry, it's really quick. When we were talking about the Cranbrook item earlier, I did ask a few times about what's happening with Cranbrook Town Centre, and I wondered if we could have a report, not from Ed, because I know that he's very busy doing all of the local plan stuff, but maybe somebody from the Cranbrook team on actually what's happening in the rollout of infrastructure in the town centre, as opposed to what we were talking about earlier. Thank you.
Is that okay? Oh, Andy, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I should have answered the question earlier. Just to say, there is a specific Cranbrook orientated meeting of the Cabinet a week tomorrow on the 28th that will have 5 papers, one of which is specifically on the town centre, and will provide a full update.
Thanks very much, Andy. Right. So going back into the closing statement again, just that brings our meeting to an end. So can I just thank everyone, including any of the members of the public watching online, for taking part. Can I remind all those present that your comments will be live to the public until it's been confirmed that the meeting is no longer live. Thank you and have a great afternoon.